Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on the Modern Road Ecologist Toolbox. This is Module 3. My name is Karma Yangzom, and I am the Principal Environment Specialist in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB. And I will be moderating the webinar today. So before we begin, we will have some opening remarks from Mr. Hiroaki Yamaguchi. We can call him Hiro. He's the Director of the Transport and Communication Division in the Southeast Asia Department of ADB. And in short form, we call it SETC. Hiro has 25 years of experience in transport policy planning and engineering, both in public and private sector, which includes 17 years with ADB in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So he's been the director of SETC since 2017. And before that, he was the director of the South Asia Transport and Communication Division. That's where I was before, and he was my director before. So he was the director of SATC before. As the director, Hiro oversees transport and communications operations, where he ensures project delivery covering various transport subsectors together with improved contract awards and disbursement. Before becoming director, Hiro was with the South Asia Department, serving as a mission leader for transport infrastructure projects and also as the head of the project administration unit. Mr. Yamaguchi, or Hiro, also contributed to the ADB-wide reform initiatives as a task force member of the Procurement Reform Task Force and the Strategy 2030 Midterm Review Working Group. Prior to joining ADB, he worked as a consultant for the transport planning projects in Southeast Asian countries, Australia and Japan, including PPP projects, and with public transport agencies on bus and railway planning projects in Australia. So over to you, Hiro, to please deliver the opening remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Karma. Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everyone attending this third and final module on the Modern Road Ecologist Toolbox. It is great to be part of this training today. I was informed that this series of training is about changing the narrative from transport at the cost of nature to transport for the nature, and was invited to share some views about the changing design approaches for linear infrastructure. This mainly refers to road and rail projects. As we know, road and rail projects cover long distances and cross various administrative and natural boundaries. It is a well-known fact that social and environmental safeguards play a critical role in making or breaking these project types of projects, especially where there are social resettlement issues or environmentally sensitive or protected areas involved. I remember in my earlier transport projects also, data collection, processing, and analysis was a tedious process. Often we relied on physical labor and manual paper-based records. Sharing of data across project teams was much more challenging, requiring physical exchange of information, which is also time-consuming. Project planning and design can also be tricky at times due to difficulties in mapping information on critical habitats, making it challenging to develop alignments to satisfactorily mitigate environmental impacts. Okay, now fast forward to today, we are in a different world from the last decades. Prior to the pandemic, we did see advanced technologies already being increasingly deployed in transport infrastructure. But in the past year, even though the pandemic has severely disrupted transport systems through lockdowns and restricted movements, we have also witnessed unprecedented acceleration on the uptake of technology. For example, we are deploying drones to overcome manpower challenges to road and rail projects in Southeast and South Asia, smart port solutions in the Pacific region. ADB is also piloting high-level technology solutions to tackle safety and security challenges on connectivity. The significant advancements in technology and availability of these resources at a much lower cost today present a real game changer to the way we can design and deliver projects. It is great to know about the highly innovative ideas that was shared in the earlier modules on data collection and the presentation using online resources, apps, and web-based platforms, enabling smooth and efficient data sharing and analysis for enhanced ecological assessment. Such advancements open up new opportunities to enable a paradigm shift in the way we can deliver transport projects. There does not necessarily need to be trade-offs, and we can go so much further than just mitigating environmental impacts. The newly available tools allow us to push the boundaries to strive for win-win solutions through transport investments. Ecologically friendly linear infrastructure can now exist with proper upstream planning using online ecological and spatial databases and risk screening tools, not just to avoid negative ecological impacts, but also to incorporate nature-based solutions to deliver ecologically friendly infrastructure for net positive environmental outcomes. This paradigm shift will require a different approach to designing solutions, one that will require project teams maybe to collaborate across our thematic and sector boundaries to combine integrated solutions to address shared challenges on delivering social economic growth, as well as to deliver restorative and regenerative ecosystems. I understand that the first two modules were very well received by participants. I'm sure today will be the same. With this, I'd like to wish everyone a successful webinar and hand the floor back to you, Karma. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiro. Thank you very much for those very positive and encouraging words. So now we will begin with the main part of the webinar, and I will first introduce our resource persons. And I hope Clara's video is working now. So this time we have Miss Clara, who will be doing the main presentation today. She was not there in Module 1 and Module 2. So Dr. Clara Grillo is a researcher at the Center for Marine and Environmental Studies at the University of Lisbon in Portugal. Her research involves ecological modeling and studying the effects of anthropogenic activities on landscapes and wildlife. Her work focuses on the processes and patterns of underlying species responses towards roads, namely on the effects of road networks on birds and mammals. She is the executive coordinator of the project on review of Red Book of Mammals in Portugal and evaluation of their conservation status in the University of Lisbon. She is the co-founder of the IUCN Latin American and Caribbean Transport Working Group. So Clara is the first speaker for today, but let me also quickly introduce our other two resource persons for today. Many of you may have already met them virtually in the last two webinars, but in case we have some new participants, let me quickly introduce them again. We have Benjamin Dorsey. He's an environment scientist and spatial data specialist. He works for Parks Canada as an ecosystem geomatics technician, working on mountain goats and caribou projects. He has studied the impacts of railways and roads on wildlife for the past 14 years. His career has focused on developing solutions to ecosystems and transportation challenges by applying GIS technologies. He has worked with the China Academy of Transportation Sciences and in a number of other countries around the world. And we have Dr. Anthony Clevenger, or we can call him Tony. He's a senior research scientist at the Western Transportation Institute in Montana State University. Over the past 25 years, his research has focused on developing science-based solutions for conservation of landscapes and animal populations in areas experiencing expanding road systems. He has published his research findings in over 80 articles in leading international scientific journals and co-authored 3 books on road ecology. He has served as the principal investigator, planning, designing, and evaluating the use of wildlife fencing and crossing structures in projects in Canada, the US, and throughout the world. So this is a quick introduction of our 3 main resource persons. We'll have another speaker. I'll introduce her later today. Clara, can I please invite you to get started with the first presentation? Yes, and your video is working. Good to see that.
Thank you, Karma. Good afternoon and good evening to all participants, depending where you are. And thank you for attending the third module that we will be focused on how to map the potential movement corridors. So I'm going to share now the screen. I think you can see. No? Yeah,
yes,
I hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, so the module will, let me put here, well, the module will consist in 4 parts. I will briefly address why it's important to map the habitat suitability and identify the movement corridors. Then I will show the principles and concepts of the 2 softwares, Maxent to analyze the habitat suitability and the Circuitscape to analyze the habitat connectivity. Then we will show how to prepare the data and the GIS information. And then we'll run, well, I will do a demonstration to run the model, the modeling habitat suitability and potential movement corridors with the Maxent and the Circuitscape. So since the current protected areas that we can see here in green are simply not large enough to encompass the variety of species, process, habitats necessary to fully conserve biodiversity. And since there are plans of expansion of the linear infrastructure like transportation, and we know that it is expected to increase the road network in 60% from 2010 to 2050. And we already know the impacts of the transportation infrastructures, and the main effects, the main negative effects are the barrier effect and additional mortality for many species. One of the big initiatives is the Belt and Road Initiative. So it is crucial to map the species habitat suitability, because we need to identify what are the main spatial drivers that explain the species occurrence, and identify what are the most suitable habitat for the species. And then we can identify where we can prioritize areas for conservation. So here is one example of a study from Bay and authors in 2018 for the snow leopard. And you can see for all the reserve, only a few areas are highly suitable habitat for the snow leopard in orange, and in green, moderate suitable habitat. So we need this kind of information to prioritize areas for conservation and protect them. And this will be also the basis for the habitat connectivity models. So it is also crucial to map species movement corridors. Due to expansion of the infrastructure, we need to identify barriers to movement, linkage between critical areas, and identify paths of movement. And when, if we can overlap the transportation plan, the layer, we can see where are the places where we can locate the mitigation measures. So this is an example of a study from Hamid and the authors in 2020 for snow leopard in Pakistan. And you can see that in brown, the areas that are more likely to move the species. So if there is a road being constructed here, we can see easily where to locate the mitigation measures in the areas where is more likely to move the species, in this case, the snow leopard. So one of the approaches that is commonly used is to run analysis with the Maxent. Maxent is open source, is a user-friendly software, and established a relationship between species occurrence. So here we can see the dots, for example, of a species in our project, and then established the relationship with the spatial information. And that spatial information can be altitude, land use, hydrology, or human disturbance like urban areas or road network. And using this relationship between the spatial information and the species occurrence, we can see what are the spatial variables that are more related with the species occurrence. And then we can identify where is the most suitable habitat. So this is the output of the Maxent. So you can see these colors between blue and red. The blue is 0. It is the lowest probability of species occurrence, and the warm colors like red and orange are the areas where is more likely to occur the species. So we can translate in terms of habitat suitability. So the areas where is predicted higher probability of species occurrence is the areas where the habitat is more suitable, and the areas where there is less probability of species occurrence is the lowest habitat suitability. So in our study area for the project in Nepal, you can see in blue the areas that are not suitable, and in green some areas, in orange and red the areas that are more suitable for the species. So there are also several approaches to run connectivity models, and one popular approach is the open source and also user-friendly software. It is the Circuitscape, and apply the circuit theory to predict connectivity in heterogeneous landscapes, and it considers all possible pathways across a landscape simultaneously. So to run this analysis, we just need two types of information. The focal nodes, that is the locations of nodes between which effective current flow are to be calculated. So what we want here is we define here the nodes in the border of our study area. We wanted to know all possible combinations between the focal nodes to see where are the best places or where are the places that can be potential movement corridors. And we need the habitat suitability model, the output from Maxent. And with this, these two types of information, we can generate habitat connectivity surface and identify the potential movement corridors. But the focal nodes could be not only in the border of our study area, could be also in the habitat patches that are very, very suitable. And we want to know where are the best linkage between these habitat patches. So here I include three, for an example, 3 focal nodes, and the Circuitscape will try to see what are the combinations between the 3 focal nodes. And for example, in this case, this is the best place to define the corridor. So if there was a road planned in this location, it will be very easy to know where we can implement the mitigation measures. Could be overpass, and the pass depends on the species. So we can put the focal nodes in the border of the study area or between suitable patches that we want to know where are the best linkage. And this is the output of the Circuitscape. So it's a single map with the current densities at each cell, where the higher current means easier movement through the landscape. So here you can see in blue the higher current, and in brown the lowest current, or zero in this case. So we have here in our roads that we overlap with this habitat connectivity surface, we can see two regions where is more likely the species to move, here and here, where is the blue. So back to our study area, you already know the project of Nepal. We have to identify movement corridors for this road. So this road that is in the north of Chitwan National Park, and also that cross part of the Parsa Wildlife Reserve. And we defined a study area of 30 kilometers distant from the road. So this is our defined study area. And we defined 30 kilometers, but we could define 20 or 40. We try to assume a trade-off between the data that we can collect from the Chitwan National Park, that we have a lot of information, and also be large enough to include several home ranges for our target species, the tiger, and not so big that include areas that doesn't help us to define the movement corridor. So we define 30 kilometers around this road. So what kind of species data we plan to get? You already know it. Tony Clevenger talked about that in the module 1, only to recall this. So we have roadkill survey data, underpasses use, bird watching, sign survey, and camera trapping. Well, the project started in the field work started in February 2020, when began the pandemic. So we didn't have good luck in terms of field work. So we had, fortunately, our team could implement and put the cameras on the roads, but the underpass monitoring, the sign surveys, bird surveys, and roadkill surveys were very limited due to pandemic. So we don't have too much information. So we will use that information to validate the model, the final model with the potential movement corridors. So what we have now, we have the camera trapping from the National Tiger Survey, from the Chitwan. We have a lot of data, and also the data from the cameras that we implemented close to the road. So what we need to do next? Well, for the National Tiger Survey, they gave us the table with the occurrences, but for the camera, our camera trap, we had to classify the photos, and then with all this information, we could map the species occurrence by species, and then the relationship, we established the relationship with the spatial variables, and we can, with the Maxent, define the habitat suitability for the species, and with the focal nodes running the Circuitscape, we can generate a surface of habitat connectivity, and then identify the potential movement corridors. So the first thing when we get the cameras, and this was the work most that Bhuvan Sharma, our colleague from our team, did it, was the classification of the image. We use the software time-lapse that is open source and very user-friendly. You can download from this link. This is the web page. It's here, download and install. And then this is more or less what we get. So when we upload the photos, we can see the photo, and then we can classify the species. We have to prepare the time lapse. Ben will show you how to do it. So we had a very, very simple table. So it was very, very easy to classify the photo. So we have a list of species of mammals, and then for birds, amphibians, and reptiles, the number of individuals, the number of humans, and comments if we couldn't identify, and we need, for example, expert on some species to validate our photo. So this is the table from the time lapse. So you can see like here, the mammals, well, the column with the mammals, the identification of the photos. And you can see that some are empty because it's a repeated photo, or because there is nothing. So we only identify one individual and not several photos of the same individual we didn't consider. Then we have the folder that is very, very important because it has the identification of the camera, and it will give us because we have the coordinates of the camera. It's important information because we can associate the occurrences to latitude and longitude, and the date and time. That is very important for us too. So the way to prepare this table is very easy, and I will ask Ben to show how easy it is to organize the time-lapse table for the image classification, and then I will be back. Ben?
Okay, thank you, Karma. Yeah, I'll just share my screen and give everyone a quick run through of how to create the data entry forms and the template for classifying camera trap images. So from the website URL that Clara showed you earlier, you download the time-lapse software and extract it. It's a very simple piece of software. It doesn't even require an install. Here on my screen, you can see, let's see, let's get a simple, easy version here. Here's the extracted file. And to run the classification tool, you use the timelapse2.exe. But to create the template to classify the images, we use this editor. And I've already opened the editor here. There's some brief instructions, and then there's a second tab where you do the work here. So you click on template. And right now it's blank because I haven't started a project yet. And it's quite simple. Across the top, we'll see the types of fields and columns and data entry form elements. And then down here in the bottom of this window, we'll see what the interface will look like. You can create an empty template standardized for kind of a standard project, which assumes you have a file name, a path, and a folder. The standard template in the software itself, it extracts the date and time the photo was taken, and it gives you two fields for assessing the quality of the image and whether or not the image is something you would like to keep or delete. So you can see the standard template here has already populated what the data entry form down below would look like. And I'll move from this to the template we actually used for the Nepal project that Clara was just describing. So because we had well over 600 species that we wanted to classify in our camera trap images, we created a little bit more sophisticated template. And so for that template, what we did was we had a field that allows us to pick the camera trap location. We have a field for mammals, birds, and reptiles and amphibians separately. The good part about splitting our species lists up like this is it allows us to pick the species quickly. The common challenge in camera trap work and classifying these images is you end up with thousands of images. So classifying the data, saying there's an elephant or there's a hare or there's a snake or whatever species in that photo can take hours and hours and hours. So the pros for using a really simple tool like this is it's very quick. So by keeping the imagery on your computer and building a simple data entry form, you can classify the imagery rapidly, at least more rapidly than you can doing it by hand. And Clara and Tony and I have done that in the past, and this is definitely the most efficient way to do it. You can see some other form elements in this interface, the number of animals, of course, because when we're assessing both the species richness and abundance at a camera trap site, we not only want to know how many species were detected at that camera trap, but how many individuals were there. We also have included a few elements here. This one, humans, not researchers. For many of these sites, we want to understand the levels of human use. We provide a comments box. Here, we often flag photos that we might use for media, for report, a really interesting or fascinating photo, or for a photo where we're not sure what species is in the image. Many times, because the camera traps work both in the dark and during the day by using a color infrared flash, the animal might be blurred or hard to distinguish. So once we have this form, as we fill this out, this form essentially creates a spreadsheet. It can be exported as a comma separated values table or an Excel spreadsheet. And that's how to use time-lapse. I might share one more thought before I hand the screen back to Clara. And that is, we use this simple desktop tool rather than an online tool due to the time it takes to upload and exchange photos. For a large camera trapping project like this one, moving the images around can become a large hurdle. And in places with slower bandwidth, uploading is often much slower than downloading data. So it can be a big challenge to essentially get the imagery online and into other tools. However, some of the new tools being developed offer the chance to crowdsource the image classification and may even offer a chance for there to be some algorithms that classify the images for you. So they may be able to flag false positives where the camera has taken a picture, but there isn't an animal in the photo. And that alone can save a lot of time. Okay, thank you. And I'll hand the presentation back to you, Clara.
Thank you, Ben, for the explanation. So you can see how easy it is to prepare the time lapse, and it's a lot of fun to identify the species. Even when it's in Nepal, not in my country, that we don't have a high biodiversity, but it was a lot of fun to identify the species from the photos. So we will keep on going. I'm going to share again. And only back to the, so this was the table that we get from the time lapse. We reorganized the table. So we, for us, and for this study, we have all the information on humans. So we delete the part of the humans and the domestic species. We add the latitude and longitude because we know where were we know the cameras, and we know the coordinates of the cameras. So we add that information, and we also add the order, family, and species to be consistent in all the table. And also we can filter if we want only to analyze one order of species or family, or species by species. We have that information. We also add some like date that we have already, and the month and the season. We used, well, we are using the information from the dry season because it's the best, where we get more information. So we have already prepared the species data. Now I'm going to show you how to prepare some GIS information. So we choose altitude, hydrology, land use, buildings, human population, and roads. So for the altitude, we can get for free in this link. This is the page that you can get, and here is the area of Nepal and our study area. The format is a TIFF, the year is 2011, and the resolution is very good, it's 12 meters and half. So what I had to do is use the ArcGIS, and ArcGIS, it's a very, very good software, but it's not for free. But it's a very, very powerful software for geographic information system. So if you have the opportunity to get a training, or you already use ArcGIS, I share here the steps to prepare the information. So what we need for the Maxent is, we decided to have a resolution of 100 meters by 100 meters, the cell size, and all the information has to be in ASCII file. So we go to our Toolbox, data management, we resampled the altitude to 100 meter cell size, and then we convert the raster to ASCII. So you can see here our raster prepared for the Maxent. So here you can see the higher altitude and the lowest altitude. And then hydrology, we try to use hydrology that was for free, but we reached to the conclusion that was not a good resolution. We found we overlap in the Google Earth, and the lines were very far away from the real place of the river. So we have to pay to the Department of Survey in Nepal for this information. And this is a very, very good information with a scale of 1 to 25,000, so it's very good. And we have two types of information. It's the main rivers in polygons that you can see in this blue, and the minor streams in this all light blue that is everywhere. So because it is everywhere, we don't find a pattern. So we decided only to use the distance to the main rivers. So we need a surface of distance from the rivers. So the blue, the dark blue is where the river is. And then when the starting to be more distance from the river, the colors change. And here you can see that is more distance, and also these areas without rivers are also these areas. So we use the ARC Toolbox, Spatial Analyst, and then we choose estimate the Euclidean distance from the rivers, and then we convert raster to ASCII. The land use, and we choose, well, the dry season. We get the satellite image from this link. This is for free. It's an image from 2020. The resolution is very good, but we need to classify the image. I didn't, because I'm a biologist. I had some training on remote sensing, but we had in our team experts on remote sensing, and they did it, the classification of this image, satellite image. So what I got from my colleagues was this map, a raster, with this classification that they had, because of, well, you know, you need an algorithm to classify all this image, and then you need to validate. In general, the classical way is to go to the field and choose random points and look at this in the field to see if it is well classified. But because of limitations in terms of movements, because of the pandemic, they used Google Earth. That is a very good resolution to validate this information, and the validation was very good. So what I just did was go to resample to the information to the cell size that we want, 100 meters by 100 meters, and then convert raster to ASCII for the Maxent. Other information could be buildings. It was new for me. It's in the OpenStreetMap, and each building is a polygon. It's for free. It's a very, very good information and can give us the idea of where is the human population and the human disturbance. So this is the format of a polygon. And the year is 2021. I also get from my city, and I can confirm that is very good information. And then what we did was the density of buildings. So we convert the polygons to points, and then points that is like centroid of the building, and then we estimate the density of the points, and then we convert to from raster to ASCII. So here you can see the number of buildings by meter square. Well, the numbers are so low, I should have estimate number of buildings by kilometer square. So this is why the numbers are so low, but it's the same. So we have here in blue the highest density of buildings that correspond to the urban areas, but we can see other buildings that are not in the urban areas, and in yellow, the lowest density, you can see some yellow here. So this is a very, very nice information to use for the models. And then we have the human population that we get also for free from this link, worldpop.org. It's from 2020, and the resolution is already 100 meters. So you can, I just convert from raster to ASCII because it was already in the resolution that we wanted. The road network, it was important for us to see also the human disturbance from the roads. There is some information available for free of the roads, but it was not good resolution for this, in fact, small area. So we have to pay to the Department of Survey to get a very good information in vectorial polylines, and we get different types of roads, the highway that overlap our roads, target roads, and also feeder road, district road, other road that we didn't use. We only used the highway because we didn't have the traffic volume, but we assume that the highway has the highest traffic volume. So what we did is, like hydrology, we generate a surface of distance to the highway. So the red is where the location of the highway, and then the different colors is different distance from the highway. So we estimate the Euclidean distance, and then we convert the raster to ASCII. So now we are prepared to run the Maxent model. So we have already the information prepared. We just need to, in our computer, to prepare and to name 3 folders. One that is the samples, where we include the information of the species. So it's a table like this. The species I call SP. I name it SP, but we need this header, species, the coordinates, and save it is a CSV. And then we have the variables, that is all the information that we convert to ASCII: altitude, the buildings, the highway, the main rivers, human population, and the land use in the dry season. And this is the window of the Maxent, so it's very, very user-friendly. You can get the information here for the species, one species. So we generated the habitat suitability model for one species, for each species, one at a time. And then we include all the variables from this folder, variables, and we can check or uncheck if we want to use all or not use all. We have to be careful because some information are continuous data, like altitude, density of buildings, human population, but the land use is categorical. We have different types of land use. It's not a number. Even is expressed as a number. So each land use type has a number, but doesn't mean it's an ordered number. So we want to know the relationship between the variables and the species occurrence likely. So we check here the response curves, and then we choose the directory where we want all the output. This is the folder of output, so we put here, and then we are prepared to run. We use the training data. If we have a lot of data, we can do that, training data 85%, and then test with 15%. It's a way of validate our model. So the output is generated automatically in the folder that names output. And this is the most important information, the link that has the summary of all the output, of all the information about the model, and the SP ASCII is the habitat suitability model, the surface. So we need to know if the model is good, and this is the measure, the AUC, area under curve, that if you have a value above 0.8 is a good model, so it fits to the data. And you can see that the training data has a higher number, 0.9, and test data has 0.92, so it's a good model. It's important to know what are the variables that can contribute for the model. This is information that is generated too. So in this case, we can see that the land use in the dry season is the information that provide more contribution to the model. The altitude somehow, but the human population, distance to highway, buildings, and main rivers has a very, very low contribution to the model. And we have to understand if this makes sense for the species. Otherwise, the model can generate a biased result that will not help us. And this is the relationship between the species occurrence likelihood between 0 and 1 and the values of the variables. So the land use dry is the most important variable for this model. Here is the one that with the number 7. So maybe we have to check if this is related with habitat of the species, and if it is okay. For example, this variable doesn't change, the human population doesn't change the likelihood of probability, even 0 or higher number. But doesn't contribute much, so it's not very important in the model, and doesn't bias the result because it has a very low contribution. This one has a low contribution, but it has a pattern. You can see that the highest species occurrence likelihood is where it's close to the rivers, and then decrease the likelihood of occurrence with the distance to the river. Maybe it can be a species that is more associated with streams or rivers. And then here we have a relationship to the density of buildings. So it decreases as the distance, the density of buildings increase. So a higher likelihood of occurrence with no buildings, no human disturbance. And sometimes happen like some weird relationships, and we have to be careful. If it is an artifact of our survey, for example, if we had a lot of information close to the highway because you put the cameras close to the highway, maybe we have a positive relationship to the highway, and it's not it's not a reality. So we have to be careful with these results. And sometimes we have to delete the variable that we think that doesn't show the reality. And this is the output, like I showed you before. So it's a map that showed the probability of occurrence. That means the habitat suitability. And this is the map that will be used for the habitat connectivity model using the Circuitscape. So now we are prepared to run the Circuitscape. We just need the two information. So we have already the focal nodes around in the border of our study area, and our habitat suitability is the same of conductance surface. So we will use as the basis for the model. The only thing that we had to change here is the habitat suitability is ASCII, so it's already prepared, and the focal nodes we had to convert from points to raster and raster to ASCII to run the Circuitscape. And this is the window of the Circuitscape. So you can see that it's very easy and friendly. So you choose the raster and choose the modeling mode, that is all the combinations of pairs of the focal nodes. Then you choose the habitat suitability model. We don't use the resistance data. We check here, data represent conductance instead of resistance. And then we use the focal node here. And then we can, well, the output, so we have to put where we want our output, and then the current maps, voltage maps can help us to understand the final map, and we can run. And run, it may take some time if we have a lot of focal nodes, because it's all combinations of pairs of focal nodes. And then we get the output. So the output will generate, the Circuitscape will generate several files, ASCII files for all the pairs, but the sum of all the pathways, the combination of pathways is this one. I name it SP6 July, but this is the common name, CumCurMap.ask. And here is the current data. So higher current means higher likelihood of movement, and the lowest in brown, so the lowest current, so it's not good for movement. So we can identify, like I told you before, two areas for potential movement corridors, and maybe these are the places where it's the best places to implement the mitigation measures. So here is the end of our demonstration of the Circuitscape. And then I will ask Ben again to show how to add the final map of connectivity to the dashboard. And we can show the very end in the module 3, all the information that we can use in the dashboard and also the map of connectivity. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will give the place to Benjamin.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Clara. Just checking. So this exercise, it should just take a couple of minutes, right, Ben?
Yes, it's very, very quick. We're just going to essentially complete the circle to show that we can, we'll use the outputs from Circuitscape and Maxent in our cycle of communication, of evaluating our project's progress.
Right.
Yes, because I see we are pressed a little bit for time, aren't we?
Yes, and we would like to take some questions as well. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just take 2 seconds here and we'll move right along quickly. Okay, so just to give you a quick picture, here we are in ArcGIS Online. What we've done is publish the final outputs from Maxent and Circuitscape as a web layer. And we've published them as a tile service. So just like a base map that you would use on your mobile device or in Google Earth or any other web mapping tool you use. We've pre-selected the symbology to highlight the different types of suitable habitat. And we've also published the habitat connectivity raster that was a result from Circuitscape. So here in the red, you can see the high conductance, or the areas where there's high connectivity based on that habitat model. Around the perimeter, you can imagine all those nodes. And so essentially what we've done is map what route based on the suitable habitat would our simulated animal go to get from each node to every other node in our study area. And so the brighter red means the more likely route the animal would go. So how we would use this in an actual project is we would publish this as a draft layer to promote discussion within our team. We might even use a web map to identify some spots where we have maybe some roadkill data or other information and inspect that site. We may print out a map or even load this into a field app that we could go out into the field and inspect this site on the ground, whether that's using a GPS or a data collection tool like we covered in module 2. Okay, and I will stop there and hand the presentation back to you, Karma.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Clara. So we have a couple of questions, and I see that Tony and Ben has already been trying to answer the questions in the Q&A box, but perhaps we can address some of these. We had the first question from Prince. What are the parameters that you have selected and used for the Maxent model to predict habitat suitability of the particular species? So I see that Tony did answer it a bit, but I think perhaps Clara, if you can help to answer that question.
I'm not sure what is the meaning of the question.
So how did you decide on the habitat suitability for the species?
Parameters.
Yes, yes. What factors did you consider?
Okay, in general, we have to know the ecology of the species. If we know that some variables explain the species occurrence, this is the best variables that we can run the model. So if there are some information that is not associated with the habitat of the species, we don't use that information. So sometimes we choose some variables for one species and other variables for other species, because we know that they can affect the distribution or the occurrence likelihood. For example, for amphibians, it's important the weather. But for carnivores, in a short time, it's not very important, the weather. So we can use the weather or the climate for the amphibians, but we don't use for the carnivores. I hope it is the question. I answered the question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you did. And just to sort of link to that question, and I also had a question, but I see there is a question linked to this from Prince again, and also from Roshan. So the question is, again, on the question of the habitat suitability modeling of each particular parameter for species is basically dependent on availability of future projection data. What are the available sources of projection data? And if it is unavailable, how can we generate? So I guess it's got to do with the future projections, like, because we know that things are changing and maybe the habitat coverage or the density of forests will not remain the same as it is today. And there may be like other things happening. So how do we account for that?
Well, this is another kind of modeling. There is some projections already for the climate change, for example, or we need that information like for the future years. And then we can try using the information of what is the habitat suitable for the species, if there is available habitat for the future. But we need to have that information already performed. So for example, if we project there is a high deforestation in an area, and the species is a forest dwelling, if we have a map without forest, we can see that the species will not occur. So we need that parameters already generated, and then we can link to the species habitat suitability and see that in the future we will not have the species in that places, as an example.
I see.
I hope I answered. So we need that information before, and there are scientists doing this, but sometimes it's very difficult to generate because we cannot validate. It's a future projection. It's not a current model. Is for the future, and it's very hard to validate this kind of models. But there are some studies that use these projections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So the question from Roshan is there any possibility to use species abundance data? So it's sort of linked.
Well, no, for the Maxent, it's only presence only. And it's, I choose this software because it's very user-friendly and is open source, but you can use occupancy model. And there are some studies that they try to use the occupancy model, and they have an idea of abundance, and it's more complex. You have to run in R, but yes, of course, you can use, and this is more interesting information and more correct information, because it's not only presence, but you have an idea of the abundance.
And sorry, just again, so my question in relation to all of this was with regard to with the species. So you showed the example of the snow leopard, but obviously in a lot of the forests, and particularly in the Nepal project, we have many species. So how do you map the habitat suitability for all the species together that are present there at the site?
Okay, there are two options. Tony Clevenger told in the module 2, one study that was published in Animal Conservation, they grouped the species in terms of ecological group. So like some species that has the same preferences all together, and then run the model of habitat suitability for all that species, so all the occurrences. And this is good because maybe we don't have too much data, and then we have a group of species and we have more data. In our case, we decided to do one by one. We want to control, some species are threatened, other species are not threatened. There are species that are much more abundant and could dominate the group of species. And we want to understand species by species, because if we have the habitat suitability or the potential movement corridors for each species, we can prioritize for areas for like the threatened species, and then do not give a priority for species that are more abundant. So we are doing species by species. So in this case, we are running models for 13 species, trying to have the large carnivores, the medium-sized carnivores, and other small mammals, and for example primates too. So different groups, but we will run species by species, and then we overlap all that information.
Great, thank you, Clara. So very interesting question from Katie. Could you imagine deploying a network of eDNA sampling points across a landscape to gather data on species instead of camera trap data? So either Clara, Tony, Ben, please, if any of you have a view on this.
So this is the environmental DNA, isn't it? Sampling points across the landscape. Well, if we have that information, that is more hard to get, more expensive to get. Yes, of course, because it gives us where is the species. And I don't know, the eDNA doesn't give the individuals, but the camera trap, we cannot see the individuals, only for the species that we can see a pattern in the fur. So it's some, well, like maybe tiger, or you know better than me, but maybe only a few species that we can see the individuals. So if we have DNA sample, of course, it's much precise, but I think it's more expensive.
Right.
I don't know, Tony maybe can help, because he already participates in studies with DNA.
Yeah, no, I've never heard of it being used terrestrially. I've heard a lot of it being used aquatically, so to determine what species are in different, what aquatic species are in different streams. But certainly if there's a way to sample on the landscape, just like you would with camera traps, every, you know, in 500 by 500 meter square cells or whatever, and collect eDNA to identify multiple species. I know there's an issue with the amount of time that DNA has to be present. It can't go back. It has to be relatively fresh. That is to say, you know, the species had to have left DNA there within like a week or two, otherwise it degrades and then you can't identify. But who knows, maybe in the next 5 years, you know, it could be used with improved technologies. It could be used equally effectively as camera traps. I don't know.
Ben, did you also want to say something? I think I see you trying to type an answer.
I was going to share, because, you know, I've worked for Tony for a number of years collecting hair trap DNA to essentially do just that. However, you know, as Clara pointed out, it's very expensive and labor intensive, using the techniques that we use for wolverine. Yeah, so I'm not sure, you know, when we're talking about multiple species, the challenge would be having a sampling methodology that would capture DNA from different species, and that data would also be something you could process, because there's the nuance of needing to know which species sample you have collected before sending it to a lab, for example.
Yeah, and this is Tony again. I was interpreting the eDNA sampling like they do eDNA sampling in rivers, where you're, scooping up some sort of sample terrestrially and analyzing that for what species have interacted with that actual sample. But what Ben is talking about is like collecting either scat or hair samples, which is the typical way of what we call DNA sampling, or non-invasive DNA sampling. And we've used that quite extensively in our work in Canada, on both sides of highways, to sample particular species, black bears and grizzly bears we focused on, and also sampling at the actual crossing structure, so overpasses and underpasses. So basically, we wanted to find out at a landscape scale what individuals were present, because we can indicate not just to gender but also to individual, and then which of those individuals out on the landscape were actually using the crossing structures, because we collected samples there. And then with the hundreds and hundreds of samples we got, we were able to determine actual gene flow, and we could identify males that were using the structures to cross the highway to go breed with females on the other side, and we knew who the fathers were, who the offspring were, etc. So you can generate a lot of samples. We probably generated 2,000 or 3,000 hair samples over a 3-year period. But like Ben said, it is still quite expensive, and I remember the cost of those lab sampling efforts each year being anywhere from $70,000 to $80,000. So quite expensive, but also provide a lot of information.
Right. So this is an interesting idea, but the cost is the biggest challenge, huh? So if we can move on, because we are running out of time. A question from my colleague Farhat. For density analysis, is there a way to identify animals, individual animals, as camera trap data can capture the same animal several times a day? So I guess the question is more about, estimating the population of the species.
Yes, you need for species that you can identify individuals by markings. You need typically 2 cameras. Like if you read any of the tiger studies that have been done in Asia, they have 2 cameras on it, one on each side of the trail, and they're able to identify individuals that way. And once you can identify individuals, then you can determine densities in those certain landscapes, whether it be protected areas or outside of protected areas, or on one side of a highway versus the opposite side. And there's actually camera software, I think Ben probably remembers the name, that actually includes that mark recapture analysis within the actual software for camera image classification.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So a very important point from our colleague Deepak from the Nepal Resident Mission. So he's saying that this project could get benefit by using this model with all the experts on board. But the question is, how can we continue with its use in future planning by government agencies involved with linear infrastructure construction and the Department of National Park and Wildlife Conservation? How can we improve the local ownership in use of these kinds of models? So your views?
Tony?
I was just going to, by local ownership, I'm not sure whether Deepak is referring to local communities or the local stakeholders like NTNC or the National Park.
The government, yes, the National Park Agency,
the government agency,
the Department of Road, Department of Railway.
These models could be rerun for different species in different landscapes with different human impacts or different land management scenarios quite simply. Like Clara showed, the models are quite simple. There's most of that data is open source, relatively easy to obtain. Some of it we had to purchase on the project if we couldn't obtain reliable, recent and accurate fine resolution data. So yeah, in short, it's quite simple to run these in different land management scenarios or species infrastructure impact scenarios as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I guess one thing is continue organizing training programs like this and inviting government agencies, and hopefully after the pandemic we can have like a more focused project-based one-on-one kind of training. Like, for example, ideally we should be sitting in Nepal, for example, and having officials from Department of Road or Department of Railways sitting, and we can demonstrate to them, and then slowly build on that and establish like an environment or safeguards unit or something like that, that would then have like a database of all of this with an IT person. So I guess in the long run, that is the part that we should take to improve ownership amongst the local government departments. So okay, the question from Roshan, regarding the less mobile species such as snails and slugs, do we consider them as well for design of crossings? Yes, very good question. What do we do about the little ones, the little species?
Well, I can speak of one project that I've been involved in Washington State, Interstate 90, where it's a highway that bisects the U.S. National Forest, and they've actually included slugs, they've included snails and vertebrates in their ecological connectivity plan. Everything from these these relatively small invertebrates all the way up to black bears and wolverines and lynx and things like that. It is generational. You won't see these slugs running back and forth using underpasses many times during a year, but at this sort of scale, it would require longer term research to see species that are on opposite sides of an underpass or an overpass to eventually recolonize this area in the middle, this overpass or underpass, and actually connect habitats. And another good example is this large overpass you've probably heard about in Los Angeles, where they're planning on doing the exact same thing with the checkered ornate beetle, which is a native beetle in that area, and a lot of pollinator species as well, to see how long it takes for pollinators to come in and start using this large land bridge and connect habitats on both sides.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So there are a few more questions, but I think Ben and Clara is answering, or they answered. Actually, I had a few things from the presentation that Clara had made. And I noticed that you had one of those maps that showed the density of the buildings. So I'm thinking that this would also be useful for our understanding the social impacts, particularly with regard to resettlement and impacts on structures. So this modeling could also be used for analyzing that kind of information, right, Clara?
Well, this information of the buildings is very, very interesting to analyze for the social part. But here it was used only to see if it affects the species occurrence. So yeah, of course you can use that information for other purposes, other goals. But in this case, it was a measure of human disturbance.
Right. Yeah. So, but then we could use that data for another purpose. Combine the buildings information, and then you also had on the population, the human population density. So I think this is something which would be useful to understand also the social impacts. My last point was on, you had the map that showed all the other roads, the different categories of roads. So I think that's very useful for understanding the cumulative impacts, right, of all the other. Well, we could also add data if there is like an irrigation canal or power transmission line or something like that. So this would be very useful for cumulative impact assessment.
Of course. We don't have that information. We know that there is a plan, for example, for the railway. And if we have that information, we could add as a layer 2 to understand if affects the species occurrence. So what we are doing now is to know what is affecting the occurrence distribution, what are the areas that are very, very suitable for the species to protect them, and to turn these areas permeable for the movement, and where we can locate the mitigation measures to keep the connectivity of their habitat. So yes, so any layer, any information that can describe better the study area can help us to understand what are the best places to prioritize for mitigation.
Right. Thank you, Clara. I think that's very important because that's something that we really struggle with. The cumulative assessment, looking at everything together, as well as understanding the future directions. And as much as possible, we need to try to add information on future development projects, to understand the bigger and long-term picture. So thank you very much for answering the questions, Clara, Ben, and Tony. And I think we should move on to the next session, which is the open discussion session. And if I can ask Cecile to please share the slide with the 5 questions. And I think we've already shared the questions to the audience, to the participants, and I hope some of you will have some feedback on this, and we will have Tony to moderate this discussion session. So Tony, over to you. And
okay.
Tony, is your video working? Because I noticed that your video was not on past couple of times when you're talking.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the dark because I'm traveling. I'm not sure if you can see me. I turned it on.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, we wanted to have about 25 or 30 minutes to have an open discussion. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for participating in the module today, and then also the past modules. The webinars generated a lot of interest and a lot of excitement in these new tools for the road ecologists that can streamline data collection and also engage stakeholders in a real meaningful way. So here at this point in this last module, we really want to hear from you, the participants, and find out more of how this information was received by you all and how it was digested, and we look forward to how it might be used in your projects and how we can improve future webinars that ADB puts on, and also organize these future webinars that ADB could propose in the future, and really help ADB meet their ecological sustainability objectives. So there's 5 different topics or areas that we want to cover, and I guess the first is just finding out was there any information that you would like to learn about that maybe that wasn't covered in this webinar? Which parts of the webinar were most relevant for your work on ADB projects or non-ADB projects? And I believe we're going to try to have people actually provide the questions orally instead of trying to type them in. And I think Chris is on hand to let people talk.
Yes. So I guess we can invite our participants to either raise their hands, and then Chris will help to turn on your audio if you would like to provide your feedback verbally, or if not, if you can also provide it in the chat box. So anybody?
And these were all sent out prior to the webinar tonight, I think. So
Yes.
You might have had time to go over these, or maybe not, but we'd certainly like to hear back from you.
Okay, someone raised their hand. Chris, can you see?
I think it was Fatih.
Yeah, I already allowed him to talk. So he can unmute.
Sorry, I can't see.
Resmi Bhaskaran.
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Yes, it was indeed a very good learning exercise for me. I came because I'm not working anything on this particular kind of work yet, but I'm basically a social scientist person. So I look into the ecological tools with that way. But right now I'm teaching ecological economics. So then I want to know that what are the different kind of tools used for different projects. So that's reason I attended this course. In that sense, it was really a great learning exercise for me. So my one question, which is keep on coming into my mind, is that when we do the man-animal conflict from a social scientist perspective, how this is actually very useful, especially in the Western Ghat region where I do stay and I focus on in the southern Indian Peninsula. But how we can actually bring the communities around that. That's something which I am thinking about it, and also looking to the resource mapping and whether it is possible to use this kind of tool to do the resource mapping before starting, like as a baseline activity, and then when maybe the later endline activity. That is the concern I do have, and then I would like to see some training programs in this regard, in future. Thank you very much, and all the resource persons were really good, very communicative. So I appreciate them, and I'm very thankful to them as well. And to Karma, you have actually led the discussion very well. So thanks to you as well, Karma. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, do you have any comments on feedback from Dr. Resmi?
No, I think that's a very good point. I think the integration of not just the sociological and the ecological in a webinar, or the ecological and the economic could be very valuable. It's not just ecological and it's not just sociological or economic, but all of these things are play an important part in cumulatively and together in these projects, and there's a need to definitely understand those three camps together in these projects. So I think that would be very valuable. And my recollection from previous modules was that we did have questions from the social scientists or the people who work on the social programs, not just the environmental. So there's a fair amount of sharing and interchange that could occur between these two disciplines.
Right. And actually moving forward, we are looking to follow a more integrated approach between environment and social issues, in our safeguards assessment. So I think we have Suva Lakshmi. So Chris, if you can please turn on her mic.
Yeah, Suva Lakshmi, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning and good night to people who are in various regions. First, let me thank Karma, Tony, Ben, and Clara for the wonderful and interesting and as well as insightful session and the modules that we have had. So now going to the questions in the order that they are there on the slide. In terms of relevance, I would say that definitely the webinar and all the three modules were extremely relevant to ADB projects, because having worked on these kind of web-based interfaces and tools in the past, especially in the energy sector, I understand that these kind of tools, wherein you can actually integrate both your site and field related work, and also relating it to the GIS interfaces developed by Esri and any other tools, where you can also integrate some of the available secondary data from the sources like IBAT and GBIF. It is really good because that gives us a very detailed and comprehensive understanding of both the direct and indirect impacts of any project in the area. Now I am basically working in the SATC division, which is the transport division out of the South Asia regional department. So I can understand that how, especially with respect to linear projects, it becomes more important. And also, especially if I take the countries like India and Bangladesh, where we have immense data, but the data is not available online to integrate well with the primary baseline monitoring that we do. In terms of the gaps, I would say that it's not basically about gaps, it's basically more about us getting into do more of the role play exercises in terms of using these tools, how to integrate the data well more with the GBIF and the IBAT data and all other online sources, because these days even the country governments are uploading a lot of remote sensing and web-based interfaces, wherein you can also download the hydrological data, the various other parameters which can integrate well with the biodiversity and the wildlife aspects. In terms of, especially if I take the example of hydropower projects, where you can actually relate to downstream and upstream impacts of various species that are available. So probably we can get into more on exercises and learn, so that we can also practically learn and run the tool, and then get to ask you more questions when we face such issues. Maybe those can come in the future or forthcoming webinars if we plan to do so. How could Spade and new web tools? Definitely, as I said, that Spade is again an interesting tool. It's just that we need to understand how do we integrate them well with the available data sources. Integration is quite possible on these web bases. The only challenge that we keep on having is about the validation of the data and timely updating of such data, because we need constantly somebody at the back end who can update the data with the current ongoing changes also in the government topo maps or the maps, especially when it comes to protected areas, environmentally other sensitive areas which keep on coming up. Like if I take the example of India, in India there are a lot of areas now which are getting defined as the ecological sensitive zone. So every quarter there is one national park or sanctuary that gets defined as an ecological sensitive zone. So we need to understand how do we well integrate and timely update this data. Now it coming to what types of information or use do you see for continuing the hub? I think this is vast, because all this information, especially when it comes to wildlife and biodiversity, and also integrating it to the other environmental factors, that one can only get that on a integrated tool like Spade or any other web-based ArcGIS tool, where you can where Esri has also authenticated all the data, and you have all the data sources. Especially you can also upload your own project KML layer there, and as we had learned in this session, and then get the data analysis quite done in a proper way. The last is future topics and exercises. As I said, it will be good if we can, ourselves integrate and try using this tool and get on to doing more role play exercises on such kind of projects, or take specific examples of some transport sector or say any other sector projects wherein we can define the core zone and the buffer zone impacts using our own data, like doing the wildlife surveys where we did camera trap surveys or roadkill surveys, and then using that data to extrapolate the information. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thanks again, and it was really useful and insightful to attend these sessions.
Thank you, Suva. Tony, would you like to
continue? Well, Suva covered all of them.
Yes.
We were. I guess we could just open it up to anybody to, if they want to. You know, we don't have to go. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if there's any comments or input that some of the participants might have with regards to the hub or with regards to the gaps or the future or SPADE, yeah, we'd like to hear from you. And thank you, Suva. That was very, very comprehensive.
A lot of work to be done still.
Yes.
A lot of progress made, but a lot of work to still be done. It looks like we're not going to get any questions. Anyone from the audience? We see that Iris has posted, thank you. Training has been useful for environment safeguards, especially in the current virtual setup. In view of the guidance note on safeguards compliance, I hope for a similar open access training series on tools for our social colleagues, particularly those working on LARR. Yes. So that's very important and a very clear message. So next time around, we need to have more coverage of social impacts in the webinar. So that's something that we should take into consideration in the next round. So if there are no questions from the audience, perhaps we can just move on to the next phase. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
We can move on, but before we move to Pam's presentation, and I see that all our panelists are still here, Hero is still here, could we turn on our videos and take a group photo? Can I invite everybody to turn on your video? And Chris, Cecile, can you please help to take a photo? Even if Chris, Cecile, Victor, if you're comfortable, please also turn on your video since you're a core part of the team. Pam? Oh yes, Bruce. Please let us know when you're clicking. Chris?
Okay, ready, smile, 1, 2, 3.
Another one, just in case someone's closed their eyes.
Okay, wait, one more. And ready, smile, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So then we'll move on to the last presentation for today, and we will have Miss Pamela Chang from the Transport Sector Group. So Pam is the Senior Transport Specialist in the Transport Sector Group in STCC, the same department as me. She is an experienced team leader with 20 years of international experience in the development and management of transport projects, including urban transit systems, railways, seaports, airports, roads, cross-border transport, and regional connectivity. Currently, Pam's current areas of interest include harnessing the potential of advanced technology and data analysis in developing smart infrastructure, as well as promoting participatory approaches in co-creating future visions for influencing transformational changes in transport services to tackle multidimensional challenges in climate mitigation and adaptation, disaster resilience, infrastructure. Chris, is that you? Do you have your mic on? Green infrastructure, road safety, institutional and capacity strengthening, and governance. So, and as you can see from the cover of a presentation, this is a very forward and future-looking presentation that Pam has for us. Over to you, Pam.
Thanks very much, Karma. Can you hear me? Just to check.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for the kind introduction, Karma, and hello, everyone. I'm really just delighted to share our work on applying Foresight in transport today. We've developed an alternative approach basically to support ADB project teams, DMC clients, and anyone really to reimagine the future of transport So we embarked on this study in the thick of the pandemic last year. And this was really in partnership with Arup, whom some of you may be aware. They're a global foresight leader in this field. It was quite challenging it would be challenging to condense the work we have done in 10 minutes. So please let me just share the relevant highlights. And if you wish to know more, please get in touch with me. Okay, so there are quite a number of definitions on what foresight is, but I just wanted to share the one that resonates best with what we are trying to achieve. Foresight is the practice of systematically analyzing the future to inform today's decisions. And why are we doing this? As we all know, the world is rapidly changing. You know, we're having this increasingly no face-to-face, but yet we can still have this massive training. And so coming back to transport, on top of urbanization, shifting demographics, climate change, conflict, access to data, COVID-19, these are increasingly impacting how we live, work, and travel. So the Foresight study was intended to better understand how these shifting contexts are affecting transport and how this knowledge can be applied in designing future transport systems. And this slide really summarizes the methodology that we have used. We first looked at the trends that are shaping the future of transport and then the implications. And based on a review of the trends, we developed a series of draft visions. The principles underpinning the visions set out the development pathways to guide project sponsors and developers towards desired futures and visions. So initially, we identified 10 broad trends. And as you can see, they represent a complex ecosystem of change. Many of us will already be familiar with, climate change and environmental risks, but equally compelling, population patterns could also increasingly be concerning due to, say, aging population. Behavioral patterns and increasingly digital lifestyles. And these are particularly accelerated by this pandemic. The compilation of these broad trends are really intended to spark dialogues on what the new normal for transport would look like. And how can we turn uncertainty into opportunity? The challenge really is not so much to identify change, but how to contextualize this change. And how do we capitalize on this knowledge to make better decisions today? And these are some of the sub-trends on the environmental degradation trend that we're witnessing at a global scale. And this includes the spread of the disease and invasive species, air pollution, marine pollution, habitat fragmentation, and risks to wildlife, as we have seen through the course of this training. In terms of implications, as we all know, large-scale infrastructure such as transport, they do have very long lifetimes, and it can take 3 to 5 years to implement. And these could even be expected to serve for up to a century, right? Like roads and rail. And the infrastructure decisions we take today can lock in development patterns for decades to come. So in this context, foresight techniques can help us to contextualize the emerging trends on what we should know about the future climate and environmental conditions, technologies, user needs and expectations, et cetera, to make better decisions in the design and delivery of transport systems today. And to support future thinking, we have created a set of visions to stimulate the reimagining how the future of transport may look like. And these visions set out goals and aspirations, and these are intended to be inspirational. So the idea is that these visions can help you to facilitate policy dialogues with our developing member country clients on what are their preferred futures by providing a picture of where we are and where we should be heading. So such dialogues with our DMC clients and relevant stakeholders internally and externally are going to be important in co-creating a shared vision based on which development pathways can be built to achieve those preferred futures. And here are the 8 visions that we have drawn up. It encompasses a broad range of considerations from, as you can see, delivering safe, reliable, and efficient systems, accessible and inclusive spaces, to things like adoption of technology. Now, some of you may observe that these look quite similar to the Strategy 2030 operational priorities, and this is indeed the case, and very rightly so, right? Because the Strategy 2030 advocates a holistic approach to development challenges that calls on all sectors, including transport, to incorporate the 7 OPs into transport projects. But what this Foresight study has done is to look at these operational priorities along with the current trends and along with the technical disruptors to contextualize what this means for transport through these visions. So let's take a closer look at the vision on environmentally considerate outcomes. So 4 principles have been identified to support the achievement of each vision. And the principles are intended to guide project developers or practitioners on the design of national strategies or sector strategies, policies, and projects in alignment with the selected 2050 vision. So for environment, on the left-hand side, as you can see, these principles are accelerating low carbon development, investing in natural capital, and maximizing ecological gain, which is the theme of this training, minimizing resource consumptions and planning for circularity, designing to minimize urban heat island effect, and increasing natural solutions. So across the table, you will notice we also identified a range of strategies to support practitioners in thinking about the levels of ambitions that they wish to achieve. To ensure relevance and taking into consideration the varying levels of development and readiness of different countries, 3 different levels of incremental strategies have been established, and these are defined as baseline, progressive, and transformative strategies. Baseline strategies present basic levels of ambition that the DMC client or practitioners should adopt. Progressive strategies will push the boundaries of what is possible, and transformative strategies represent the most innovative of all ideas. Now, due to the rapid evolution of these technologies, what we have here, these strategies should not be viewed as an exhaustive set of recommendations, but rather as a starting point to inspire practitioners and project teams to embark on their own foresight journeys to develop future-ready strategies and projects. So under Principle 2 on investing in natural capital and maximizing ecological gain, for example, you can see that the baseline suggestion is to ensure rigorous approaches to ecological impact assessments, which I believe has been the theme of this training and in the earlier modules. And the more progressive strategies talk about biodiversity offsets. And the transformative strategies call for integration of truly regenerative, so not just sustainable, but regenerative design principles like greenways. And in this case, biodiversity and nature-based solutions are fully mainstreamed, resulting in net gain in natural capital. So unfortunately, there isn't enough time to share all the 32 principles across the 8 visions today, because I think it will be a little bit overwhelming and there's also not enough time. But here's just a sneak peek of the strategies across the different visions. And the idea is to offer a menu of ideas and possibilities for practitioners to embark on their own reimagining and foresight journey. So we will invite all of you to have a look at these principles as soon as our publication is ready. Okay, so the potential application of this foresight approach includes 4 main pathways. It can be used at the very highest level to map trends, or to co-create visions amongst a stakeholder group, to develop transport strategy, or even to generate ideas to enhance standalone projects. So we are soon to publish a playbook to share methodologies to support each of these pathways. And the desired outcomes are very clear. The first is to build futures literacy amongst ADB community and our DMC clients. The second is to identify and define new investment pipeline opportunities. And the last but not least is, in doing so, it will elevate ADB's reputation amongst DMC counterparts as thought leaders, as DMCs are all also now aspiring to build back better, stronger, and greener. And so we've come to the final slide. I just wanted to share the available resources, publications, and the assets. As you can see, there's quite an extensive range of approaches and tools that are available and becoming available to help project teams identify emerging issues, negotiate uncertainties, to articulate future scenarios, and to design robust policies and strategies to tackle emerging challenges. So to wrap up, I just want to leave you with a question. Now, if there was absolutely nothing stopping us right now, what transformative ideas could we pursue to make these visions, particularly this one on environmentally considerate outcomes, a reality? So with that, I thank you, and let me hand you back over to Karma. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Very interesting and sort of game-changing kind of approach that you presented here. And it's very thought-provoking, and it would indeed be great to think about doing what we want to, achieve what we want to without any boundaries. So thank you, great presentation. And it's great that you have environmentally considerate outcomes as one of the visions included in the Foresight study. So we will now move on to the closing part, and I would like to invite Bruce Dunn to give the closing remarks. So Bruce, he's my director. He's the director of the Safeguards Division in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department in ADB. He leads a team of dedicated to ensuring the implementation of environmental and social safeguard policy principles and good practices in ADB operations. Bruce's current role builds on more than 20 years of experience in environmental impact assessment, environmental policy, biodiversity conservation, and natural resources management, working across Asia and the Pacific. At ADB, he has previously served as the chief of the Environment Thematic Group, leading ADB's proactive agenda on environment, including the implementation of ADB's Healthy Oceans Action Plan, as well as focal point for the Global Environment Facility. So with that, Bruce, can I invite you to please give the closing remarks?
Thank you so much, Karma, and hello, everyone. This was a really interesting session, and I really want to congratulate all of the organizers and the resource persons for successfully undertaking the webinar series. And of course, to thank all of you as participants for joining. And I do sincerely hope that the session will be valuable for your future work. Now, personally, as Karma has said, I've been involved in environmental impact assessment, and I'm an ecologist by training. So I found the approaches presented to be very exciting, but also very practical. You know, we now have access to a much wider range of data, tools, and resources than ever before. We're also able to, investigate biodiversity across the landscape remotely in ways that are much more sophisticated and using modeling tools that give her a lot greater insights. And obviously that's helpful right now as we're looking at the pandemic situation and some restricted access to sites. But I think it's much more than that. These tools obviously help us supplement and support more traditional approaches. We're used to doing literature reviews, stakeholder consultations, and site level ecological data. But these tools can obviously make those much more targeted and effective, but also help us to go beyond it. Can help us to design better projects, essentially, and to move towards some of the vision that we're also hearing from Pamela presenting, the future of transport. I think a few of the things that they can help us do is answer some of the wider questions, and these are ones you've been talking about through the training. Where in landscapes are critical habitats? Where is it most likely that threatened species will occur? Where are the most important movement corridors for species? And then based on those, it allows us to think through optimum locations and design parameters for infrastructure. Now, this helps us at the project level, but I want to make also a link here to the work at the sort of sector planning or transport planning level. this can really help us as we move upstream, and it can help us do better planning, but also avoid those scenarios where projects are proposed in landscapes that are going to have impacts that can't be fully avoided, or perhaps not even fully mitigated, and in some cases not even offset. So knowing that these impacts can occur, and if we can consider them at a much earlier stage in the planning process, it can really help us to improve the quality of the work that we do. And I think some of you will know what I'm talking about. You know, I've worked in this area for many years in Asia, and I think some of you will also have seen these constraints at project levels where you're boxed in. You might have some options. Maybe you can look at the design of overpasses or underpasses for wildlife, but if you can get in earlier, you really can make a big difference. So, you know, I do hope that the increasing use of these analytical tools can be a real game changer for our ecological impact assessments, and can help us, I think, as Hiro-san was saying earlier at the opening for this session, move the transport sector investments in ways that do not come at the cost of nature. Now, of course, this is really important. Some of you will be aware that we're already well into what is being referred to by scientists as the 6th mass extinction crisis for biodiversity, and also beyond what Professor Johan Rothström and others are talking about, planetary boundaries for biodiversity. We need to start to move you know, sort of into a safe space for humanity where we're not compromising the ecological services delivered by nature. And what this means moving forward is that we have to transition to a stage where we can achieve net zero loss of nature. Now, we talk about no net loss of biodiversity at project levels, but we need to move to a much wider level of you know, net zero loss of nature at society, in the same way that we're seeking to transition towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions to address the climate crisis. So, you know, let's see your participation in this training and the adoption of these newer, more sophisticated tools as a timely opportunity to kind of step up our joint efforts at addressing some of these, you know, local but also global challenges. Now at ADB, this is something we're thinking about a lot. As Karma mentioned, I'm leading the team that is responsible for our safeguard policy statement, and we're currently in the process of reviewing this. We plan to update the policy by March 2023. And as part of that, we're really looking carefully at our existing requirements for biodiversity and how we can enhance biodiversity impact assessment and management. So again, I think these tools really can offer us some good insights into how we can go about that. In addition, of course, data management is very important, and we're currently developing what we're calling an integrated safeguard information management system. And I think better data around biodiversity can certainly feature into that system, helping us to track our projects at a more sophisticated level than we've ever had before. Plus, we're exploring ways to systematically store project data in ways that can be more easily accessed and reused in future projects. And you know, I think many of the projects that we support in finance and projects that governments are working on create these great data sets for biodiversity, but they usually stay at the project level. They're not being shared more widely, and they're not influencing further work around biodiversity and landscapes or the design of future projects. So this is something we can improve on. And I think the online hub and the data dashboard created for this training, it was demonstrated in the previous module, shows that this is very much possible. So it's something to build on. And incidentally, for our participants today, I understand from the organizers that the online hub will remain open for the next couple of months. So I would encourage all of you to continue exploring the hub and trying to use the tools that have been demonstrated in this training in your own projects. And you know, moving into the future, you know, we'd certainly be interested to work with you and support the use of these tools within the projects that ADB is helping to finance, and also picking up these tools in work with our developing member countries moving forward. So looking ahead, it's great training. I feel really hopeful. And with the increasing use of this sort of modern road ecologist toolkit, and with all of you starting to use these tools, I think we can do better. And we can certainly improve the design of transport projects, effectively for both people and nature. And that would be a win-win scenario. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Karma, to close things out. And thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, there is still a lot of hope. And we will continue to organize these kind of trainings. So before we close, I have to thank all the people who have been working behind the scenes to put this training series together, webinar series together. From the environment thematic group team, we have Krista Bunger, Cecile Vilena, Victor Tumilba, Isao Endo, and Chinky Aguado. So thank you so much to my colleagues who have been working behind the scenes consistently and coordinating with colleagues in other departments. From the transport sector group, thank you, Pam. Pam is the lady who presented today. Thank you to Noel and Diane for helping to spread the word on this training amongst the transport community. And thank you to our colleagues from the IT department. And a big thank you to our colleagues from the Department of Communications. That's why we have this great website with all the information on the webinar series and all the presentations and recordings uploaded all neatly in one place. So we have Shay, Real, Neil, and April. Thank you very much. And I think we've already shared the recording and the link to the Dev Asia page, which has all the information material. And in turn, Ben will be helping to also add a link to the Hub, a link to the training page within the Hub website. And a very big thank you to our 3 resource persons, Clara, Tony, and Ben. Excellent presentation, excellent discussions. And last but not the least, to our audience and participants, thank you very much for all the interesting questions and hanging on and sticking there. I know some of you participated in Module 1, Module 2, and I still see you today. So thank you very much. And last thing I would like to inform you, this is in reference to what Bruce had mentioned on the Hub. So the Hub page will still be live and active for up to next few months, maybe 6 months. It really depends on how much demand there is. So we invite you to please continue to try the exercises. And actually there is an exercise 3 that has been posted, which links to the demonstration that was done by Clara and Ben today. So I invite you to please continue trying out the tools and apply it to your projects. That would be really great if you can try to apply the tools to your project. And Ben will be adding a Contact Us tab on the Hub. So if you get confused or stuck with anything, you can still reach out to them and ask them for help. So we look forward to seeing some of you doing some of the exercises and seeing some maps being uploaded in the Hub. With that, thank you again to everybody. I really enjoyed these webinar series and I learned a lot throughout the process. And yes, one last thing is we will be sending a feedback form, and we will also be sharing the recording of this webinar together with module 1 and 2. And in the feedback form also, we will again ask for your feedback. And if you can please really give us feedback, particularly on how we can improve and what would be most useful for you in the future trainings that we organized. So with that, I close this webinar and thank you. Bye-bye and good night to Tony and Ben. And I think it's still afternoon and morning for other participants in the webinar.
Thank you, Karma.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.